I'm an 18-year-old from the UK. This happened in February 2019, and I was 17 at the time. I got set up on a semi-blind date. We had seen photos of each other by a mutual friend, and this guy we'll call Cameron. He was 19. Cameron seemed like your average guy. Maybe a little into video games and anime and stuff, but overall, nothing my friend told me about him seemed off in any way. Our mutual friend gave us each other's numbers, and we texted for a night and decided to meet in a Starbucks the next day since we were both free. I never like to meet new people this soon, but I figured since Cameron knew my friend, it couldn't possibly go wrong. But how mistaken I was. I arrived slightly early, ordered my coffee since I never liked guys to feel that they had to buy anything for me, and parked up on a seat facing away from the door and pulled out my book. I'm maybe there for 15 minutes chilling out, and I get a text saying he's here. So I'm like, great, I'm at X table. I feel a presence over my shoulder, and I turn my head slightly in acknowledgement. He must be here. Before I even get the chance to squeak out a hello, his lips latched onto my neck, and he starts sucking my neck. Now, I don't like when people are touching my neck at the best of times. I'm incredibly ticklish, and I get super uncomfortable by people even being around my neck. The few times I've had massages or hair treatments, I've been holding my neck just in discomfort, and he's latched on it like a leech. And this man smells horrendous, kind of like dust personified. I freak out and elbow his chest to get him off of me. He lets go and looks at me with this weird expression on his face and laughs in just sort of a deadpan manner. It's really, really creepy, and I started to become alarmed. I asked him what that was about, and he just says, I thought it was cute. Cute? In what world? I try to have a conversation. I'm like, okay, first impressions don't mean anything. Let's try and give him a chance. But he's just creepily staring at my chest. He says, wow, I didn't know Asians could have chests like those. I better not let you go. That's a direct quote, and I cannot make this up. I'm distinctly uncomfortable, but I don't want to just run away. He's giving me really weird vibes, so I go into the ladies' bathroom and wait for someone else to come in. I ask her to help me get out of here undetected. I don't want this man following me home or some craziness. She, of course, agrees, and she lends me her hat and scarf, as it was February in the UK after all. And we come out of the bathroom together, and she manages to help me sneak out of the back door of the Starbucks without him noticing. He asked my friend where I went, but I told my friend to never mention me again. I was too terrified. I know I probably didn't behave well. I should have just told him I was leaving, but honestly, I was just too scared. Dear guy who decided it was appropriate to suck my neck before he'd even said hello, please, never, ever text me again. I'm a 32-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I don't have time to go out and socialize often, so I have to rely on a lot of the apps to go on dates. I matched with this really cute girl around my age. We had a good conversation, and then we scheduled a date. It was a bar restaurant not far for either of us to drive, so it was easy, and she was very pretty in person, and we got along great. During our conversation, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. And I also learned that she had a roommate, whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that and told her as much, and she said that he's harmless, so I kinda let it go. We had a few drinks and were there about another hour, and at her suggestion, she said that we go back to her place. And I mean, I wasn't going to argue, she was hot. She then insisted on driving. I told her I was fine, and she said no, that I had been drinking, and she saw too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying. but I only had 2 gin and tonics and was fine, and again, she insisted. And I thought it was weird, but I didn't care. We went to her house, and she walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it, it was already open, which I found very odd because she said that she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that, I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either, and I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said she ate it as a snack before heading to the bar. It just didn't make sense, and before you could say anything, she just kissed me and put her arms around me seductively and said for me to take her to her room. Again, she was very beautiful, and I just quit caring about that cereal. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5, we were in bed, and my back was to the window, and she let out a huge gasp, a scared gasp. Her eyes were at the window, and I turned around and saw someone in a hoodie, and they took off. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran to make sure that her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. I went to open it because I was going to mess up the dude, or at least try to, and she told me to just go back to her bed with her. I screamed at her and asked her if she was insane, and she told me that he does this and just goes away. And I asked her, You know this is your ex? And she said yeah, and to not worry about it. At this point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem at all scared and kept trying to get me to go back to bed with her. I didn't want to call the cops because, for all I knew, this dude might be a cop, and she'd know the cops that show up and would take her side. I also couldn't just leave because my car was at the bar and I was terrified. At this point, I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the cereal, and I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into. I should have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicked in, and I told her, if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise, I'll kill you both. I'm not some hard ass or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, they'd have a fight on their hands. And my thoughts of what were going to happen to me were all over the place. I ordered an Uber off my phone and didn't say anything. I just kept arguing with her and asking what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so I could leave ASAP. Luckily, I never got my pants off and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed. The Uber showed up, and without saying anything, I just opened her door and ran out as fast as I could. I looked back at the door and she was just kind of standing there. It's only been a little over a month at this point, but I honestly have no idea what in God's name I got myself into. And I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based off of the factors I told you. I feel like either a robbery or some weird fetishized cuck type thing was happening. I don't know. Definitely something I'm very mad at myself for letting happen. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well, if they ever saw her, warn the next guy. I was biking, but mostly on foot, and as I was walking, listening to music, a car pulled up beside me. Since I was near someone's house, I didn't think much of it and assumed it was their house that they were pulling up to. But I was wrong. And just to give you an idea of the difference in the size between me and this guy, I stand at 5 feet 115 pounds, while he looked to be around 6 foot 3 inches tall, 180 pounds. As he came out of his car, he started a conversation with me, saying something like, "Hey, where you headed?" And I responded with a very short and curt, "Just walking around." He then said, "It's pretty late. You want me to give you a ride home?" I declined, saying, "No thanks, I don't live in this area." And after I made this statement, he looked at me and asked why I was walking alone. I simply ignored him and quickened my pace, causing him to speed up as well. Eventually, I came across a house with its garage open, and without thinking, I ran in, seeing an older man sitting in there. I told him that someone was following me and to please help me, and he got up and started yelling at the man following me, telling him to F off and saying that he had a gun. That guy retreated back to his car and just sped off. I thanked the garage man, and he told me to stay safe. And that night, I ran as fast as I could back to my home. Throughout the story, I would like for all of you to keep in mind that I was 20 years old and very naive. You're going to think that I'm stupid, and I know I was. Probably lucky to be alive, and God do I know that, and I kick myself whenever I think about this to this day. I just wanted to get some other opinions. Maybe I'm wrong about him. So about 20 years ago, I was walking down the road in a not-so-great area. It was summertime, and I was dressed appropriately for the heat, shorts and a tank top. I'm very thin and was downright skinny, and I've gotten mistaken for a lady of the night more times than I care to admit, and this may or may not be important to the story. So anyways, I was walking to pick up my son from daycare, and as I'm going about my way, a truck full of men started to catcall and follow me. They turned around several times to yell at me out of the window, and I was getting nervous about it. I was passing a gas station parking lot, and a man not much older than myself stopped in a nice car and asked if I would like a ride. He didn't seem scary, and he was attractive, so I said okay and got in his car. Sheesh, I wish I could smack myself now. So I get into the car with him, and he asks where I'm going. I tell him it's about a mile straight down the road that I'm on, and he starts going the wrong way and just tells me he needs to turn around, and I pay very little mind to it. He starts to ask me about myself, so I tell him. I was escaping a DV situation and was staying in a woman's shelter nearby. I was telling him how closely my activities were monitored and that I was due to pick up my son any minute. I think this may actually be what saved me. And at some point I notice that he takes another wrong turn, but I don't know the area at all, so when I point it out, he says that he's taking a shortcut or something, and I just go back to talking like an idiot. Then, I get a whiff of something. I know now that the smell was death, decompositional death. And I know this for sure now. I didn't then, though. I turn around and look in the back seat, looking for spoiled food or something like that, and the car is absolutely spotless. I bring up the smell and he brushes it off and changes the subject, but for some reason the smell just started getting stronger. My stupid self brings it up again. What is that smell? And he says he doesn't know, probably something he forgot to take out and has gone bad. When I tell you guys that there was not a crumb in that vehicle, I'm baffled. But eventually he drops me off, safe to my destination, and he doesn't tell me his name, ask for my number, or give me his, and I don't think much of it until much later when I smell that smell again. But this time I know what it is, and it triggers the memory of that guy in the car. This was probably 2005 in Covington, Kentucky, and I'm pretty sure that him being aware that not only would I be missed, I would be missed quickly and my movements would be tracked very specifically was the reason that I made it back out of that car that day. So for context, we live in a 3-family home. My husband and I live on the second-floor apartment, and you would not know where the door is unless you know where the door is. And our stairs are inside a covered porch area, and they're kind of hidden. So an older man with white hair showed up at our door yesterday and knocked on the door. My husband answered, and he started telling us that he was moving into the vacant apartment in the back of the house and that our landlord said that he could wait and move into it in May. Now mind you, we know our landlord well, and no way that she would let the apartment stay vacant until May. And he said he put down a deposit and she was holding it for him. He started asking us all about our utility bills, the landlord's last name and demeanor, to which my husband answered because he thought initially that he was our new neighbor. And he then noted my husband's accent and asked, "Are you a citizen in this country?" And my husband responded yes, and then he started sharing how, it's a good thing illegals are getting deported, and asking my husband political affiliations. The conversation turned kind of weird after that, and we're independents but vote democratically and believe in respecting all people. The man left and proclaimed, "I hope you voted for Trump," as he walked down the stairs. Now, long story short, we texted our landlord and asked if she knew this man and who was renting the back apartment, and she said, "I don't know him. A young mom is renting that apartment." It's safe to say that we are super creeped out, and fast forward, he showed up again today. We bought a door camera and now have him on video. We don't understand who this man is or what his intentions are. Is he some confused old man or someone with bad intentions towards interracial couples? I don't know. I am aware this happened ages ago, but I am now recollecting my bits and pieces from the event and am thankful to be sane and safe. I'm honestly just airing it out so I can get input and opinions because I don't know what to make of it. And I'll preface this by saying that this happened a while ago, 2019, when I was 16 years old, hence I was very naive and gullible. I am aware that it might not be a human trafficking case, but it does seem suspicious regardless. And for context, this happened in a relatively large North American city. It was late December, and a few days before Christmas, I had just finished hanging out with my friends and was using public transit, the subway, to get back home. My friends lived in a different area, so I had to travel back alone in that direction. The subway wagons were mostly empty, it was already dark out, and I recall it being around 8 to 9 p.m., maybe. And I was sitting on an individual seat where the setup was structured in a way that had an other seat perpendicular to my current one, which was empty currently. This one guy, who looked to be relatively young, plopped down on that adjacent seat and greeted me with a smile instantly. I didn't think too much of it at the time, since in all honesty, I thought he was cute. Physically, he had a middle-part, chestnut hair and was relatively tall and very slim. Nice facial features, too. I don't remember his face in a very detailed manner, but I remember thinking that he was really cute. He was dressed in a sweater and jeans and didn't look dismantled or overly casual either. And upon sitting down, he greeted me smiling, presented himself, and shared his name. We then started making small talk, and he brought up the fact that he had finished university, which made me ask for his age, and he claimed to be 24, which seemed to match with his appearance. What really creeps me out is that in response, I told him that I was 16 years old, and he didn't even seem slightly fazed by that. Matter of fact, he was smirking and had formed a visible grin, talking about how he missed being young and advising me to stay in school. He proceeded with asking me about what I was doing in the metro, my plans before that, and if I had any plans coming up in the next few hours, to which I stupidly answered no. He then started expressing how his friends had come up with a supposed dare, where he had to bring a random girl over, a complete stranger, to their party or hangout by accosting them randomly, such as this very occasion, I guess. I remember finding it hard to believe, so I insisted on going home about a handful of times, to which he started pleading with me, claiming it would be fun, and if I were to be uncomfortable, he would bring me right back to the subway station. I kept insisting that my mom would get mad and asked if there was another day where we could do that, but he answered that it was a one-time thing, that it's a very uncommon gathering, that he hasn't seen these friends in a long time and wouldn't see them after the event, most probably because of a full schedule. And he also kept pushing the fact that he wouldn't be keeping me up for too long. And I eventually gave in. I know, super stupid, and I still can't believe it to this day. And we had to go through a few subway stations and got off in a pretty desolate area which was well known for its drug use and prostitution and poverty. But to be frank, I didn't know that at the time, although it was pretty obvious. The specific neighborhood still has a pretty tarnished reputation to this day. And the guy, Ben was his name, then revealed his real name to be different than the one he initially had given me and was seemingly Slavic. The name he revealed is most likely also fake too, I imagine. And he then started asking me pretty intrusive questions such as, what are your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What's stressing you out right now? Why did you decide to come along? And he claimed to like getting to know people beyond the surface level, hence why he was being so intrusive all of a sudden. I, in all honesty, was a straight-A student, so I simply told him that studies were my main concern as of now, to which he answered that there had to be more than that. And we had to be about 15 minutes in at this point when a car slowed down next to us and rolled down its windows. A man let out a hey, but was immediately shooed away by Ben. Ben then told me that the man was a supposed John, which I didn't know meant that the driver was essentially a client in that sense. And I started to get wary but still made it to the hangout a few minutes later, which was located in a regular townhouse. It wasn't worn down or anything. I was greeted by maybe 5 to 6 dudes who were seemingly over 25. 2 of them looked above 30 as well, and they all stared me down and immediately asked how old I was, and I told them I was 16. One of the guys seemed sort of phased and let out a, "Come on, man, that's my sister's age. They might even be in the same school." And they all kind of laughed it off and moved on, and then never spoke about it again and barely asked me any questions except, "How'd you guys meet?" Also, it was obvious that someone's dad had owned the place, as an old man was dozing off on the couch, and we all gathered around a dinner table. The host served me some food along with the other guests, but I refused to eat as I was honestly starting to feel a bit queasy about the situation. And after everyone except me finished eating, we all went upstairs. Ben started playing the guitar, and another man joined in by playing some keys on a piano. They then asked me to film them using Ben's phone, so I did. When that was going on, I honestly started getting terrible vibes and felt the need to leave, so I put the phone down and slowly made my way through the frame of the door. One of the older guys was standing near it and asked me what was up and if I was enjoying their company. We started talking for a minute and he claimed to be an accountant. He then was starting to lean in and tried to slightly hover over me against the door frame. However, I stepped back into the staircase and made it to the front door, opened it, and went out to the driveway. Luckily, the door wasn't locked. Ben followed and asked me if I wanted to leave, and I immediately said yeah, and this time, he didn't insist on bringing me back in. I should also add that right before leaving, I had told Ben that my mom was relentlessly calling me and was worried, to which he obliged. On our way back, he proceeded to ask me if I was genuinely 16 and not below that. He told me that if he were my dad, he would never let me out of sight again, because what I just did, which was going to the party in the first place, was the dumbest thing he'd seen any girl do, especially since I had no reason to do that, according to him. Once he accompanied me back to the subway station, I asked him for his Snapchat. I was a complete moron, or any other type of social media he had, and he told me he doesn't use his phone like that and was fully off the grid. I went back home, and I've never heard of him again. Although I didn't get conventionally harassed, like violence or anything else, and it's a pretty outdated happening, I'm honestly scared that I could have been a potential human trafficking victim, and it might be a stretch, but you never know. I want to know if there's any way that I could leave an anonymous tip to the city or something. I was searching through public records, but I couldn't find anything. But what do you guys make of this story? I met them when I was 15. He was 17, and looking back, the signs were all there. It started with small things. Us just roughhousing like buddies. We were both guys, but it would escalate to them taking me back behind the shed where my friends couldn't see and holding me against the wall and fake hitting me, sort of pretending to hurt me while laughing the whole time. But he did actually hurt me. I would have bruises for weeks. One time he literally shoved my face into stinging nettles, but my naive 15-year-old self thought it was all good and fun. If only I knew then what I would know now. So we started dating at the end of my sophomore year, and over the summer things progressed. He used to beg me to give him massages, and whenever I would refuse, he would pin me down and tickle me until I relented and said yes. And when I stopped before he was ready, he'd go back to tickling me. Sometimes he would just randomly pin me down and tickle me, and I would beg him to stop, but the only way to get him to stop was to literally fight him off of me. And this happened almost every single time we hung out, and I grew to dread it, and I don't know why I kept going back. Honestly, I was just so in love with him. I'm 5'3" and weight even less than I do now, about 100 pounds, and he's 5'7" and lifts weights for context. And I learned a lot about how to fight someone bigger off of me in those days. And it wasn't just tickling though. As I said before, they used to jokingly beat me up, but the force of his punches was not a joke. I would have bruises all over my arms and thighs from them punching me, and one time, I got in the front seat of our friend's car when he wanted shotguns, so he proceeded to punch my arm the entire 15-minute drive until I was almost crying because I kept trying to move away and tell them to stop. My friend who was driving did nothing. I don't know why. He was even older than both of us, and I don't know why he thought that was normal. It wasn't just punching me either. I had recently gotten my ear pierced, and he thought it was so funny to smack me upside the head, and once he made me bleed, and when I told him, he just said he hadn't. And I tried to talk to him about this so many times, asking, please, just don't touch my ears. And every time I asked, all he would do was correct my grammar. And this was over text. I was honestly scared to say anything in person. And here's an example of me trying to talk to him from August 2021. Now, we ended up breaking up and just staying friends, and I spent all of my free time at his house like an idiot. Another thing he started doing was always wanting to smoke me up, but never smoking himself. Huge red flag, I know, but at the time all I was thinking was more weed for me. And I say all of this to explain what our relationship was like and how utterly confusing this all was for me. And to this day, I am still confused why they acted this way. And now for the part where I think he actually tried to kill me. I was 16 now, he was 19, and the day started off normal. We were just hanging out, and from what I remember, this time period is kind of spotty as a memory for me, and the next thing I remember is him sitting on top of my chest and arms, pinning me down like he would normally do to tickle me. But this time, he had both hands around my neck, choking me. Not in a sensual way, like both hands on my windpipe, and I couldn't breathe and could barely talk. And I kept hitting his hands and arms, trying to pull him off my neck. It wasn't working. I was trying to say that I can't breathe, let go of me, but as I said, I could barely talk. And I remember thinking, am I gonna die? Is he really trying to kill me? And the whole time he was laughing and smiling, and I honestly don't remember how I got him off of me, but I think that I must have used my legs and somehow rolled over. The next day, I almost forgot it even happened, until I realized my neck was sore and bruised when I was at school, and I texted him, he left bruises on my neck, and all I got in response was, oh, sorry. And I wish I could say this was the last time I hung out with him, but it wasn't. I actually forgot that it happened until weeks later when I was talking to a friend and she was horrified, so I decided that I never wanted to see him again and texted him that, and he said, that's understandable. And that's all I got. I had no idea what he would have done if we kept hanging out or if I was just a little weaker. Honestly, I don't want to think about it. And I'm posting this here because it's not something I can ever really talk about. Being a guy, the response that I've gotten is, you must have given him the wrong idea. He probably thought that you were just down to wrestle. But now that I'm older, I know what wrestling with your friends is, and it is always a mutually agreed upon thing. Not like that. And I'm still so confused. I'm 19 now and can't imagine treating someone like that. And yeah, our whole friend group at the time called me crazy and said I was overreacting for not wanting to hang out with them anymore, and they essentially cut me out. Hey friend. When I was in my early 20s, I worked as a bank teller for a couple of years before moving on to my current industry. I've been having a run of self-induced bad dating luck. Self-induced meaning I was choosing fellas that were fast, dirty, and fun while expecting to find long-lasting love. There was this guy who was a manager of a local country western-style nightclub that did their banking business with the bank I worked at that was not my type and totally the opposite of the kind of fellas that I'd been going for. When he started coming inside the bank for the club's deposits, we had some fun back-and-forth banter that led to flirting over some weeks. Well, he eventually asked me out on a date, and I thought, whatever. He's witty and I really enjoyed talking to him, so I said yes. Clearly my normal type wasn't working out for me. I was gun-shy after my failed dating experiences, so I suggested lunch to keep things light and casual. He asked if he could still pick me up, and as a sucker for chivalry, I said yes. So he picked me up from the bank's front parking lot. In hindsight, I realized what a bad career decision it was to date a bank customer, let alone get in the car with him right in front of the building. 30-year-old me would kick my 20-something-year-old butt. The front parking lot was for customers only. The back lot was for employees only. The back lot had 3 rows, with the third being furthest away from the bank. You probably had to walk 50 yards or so from the back door of the bank to the third row, where I parked. Things seemed totally fine when I got in the car with him. It was pretty typical in terms of awkwardness, considering it was a first date. He drove me to a pub/grill downtown, and that's when things got weird. When we sat down, it was like some other dude took over his body. He started telling me about his most recent breakup and ex-girlfriend, how she ended up being a psycho. She stalked him, took out a restraining order against him, caused him to lose his job, broke his heart, the works. On and on and on. I really don't think I said more than 10 words the whole time, and some of those were to order my food. He talked about his drama the entire time. So, I'm sitting there across the table from Motormouth, and he suddenly says that we should cut the date short so I can get back to the bank in time. He says it will take us too long to get back if we don't leave now. The ride back, he was dead silent until we pulled back up into the parking lot. He tells me he had an amazing time and that he hopes we can do it again. Now, I'm fully aware people can get super nervous on first dates, and then many people struggle from social anxiety, so I'm not totally out at this point. I gave the dude my number. Then I thanked him for lunch and went back inside feeling overwhelmed and very puzzled. We were not allowed to have our cell phones out of the bank, so I put it where I always did, inside my bag that was inside my locked teller cabinet. I took a break later that afternoon, and when I checked my phone, I had well over 20 missed calls and text after text after text after text from this guy. He started out sweet, and then when I didn't answer his calls or nice texts, deteriorated into downright nuts. Why aren't you answering? Is it over already? Should I come back to the bank so we can talk? Etc. I was freaked, but at work, I just threw my phone back in my bag and tried to shake it off. I was mentally beating myself up for my bad choices for the rest of the day. When the bank closed that evening, I locked up my teller drawer and walked out to my car. There was a single red rose tucked into my windshield wiper. I yanked my phone out of my bag, and the last text I had from him was, "I hope you like your surprise." I didn't drive my car to meet this guy for our date. He picked me up in the customer lot. I got to work every day an hour before opening. There's no way he could know what I drove without doing some serious detective work. I snatched the rose off of the car, threw it down, and got out of there fast. I drove around in circles before I went home because I was scared of being followed. I blocked his number. He didn't come back in the lobby again after that day. He started going through the drive-up window. A few months later, after we hadn't seen him for a while, one of the other club employees told us that he had been fired for stealing money. I never told anyone at the bank about it, especially my boss. Sure makes me wonder about all those stories he told about his ex on the lunch date. I told my current boyfriend this story a year or two ago, and he thinks the guy had probably been watching me for a while before he asked me out, and that's how he knew which car was mine. Unfortunately, I may never know. It all happened back in the 90s. I would say 96 or 97, and I was something around 14 years old. I had this close friend, Carl. Carl was like a big brother to me, sometimes playful, sometimes a bully. As most of the boys who grew up in the 90s, we spent all of our free time playing video games, watching cheesy horror flicks, and roaming around the neighborhood on our bikes, all stickered up like motorcycles. Once in a while, my mother would take us to my grand's. They lived in the countryside just outside of our town. After having our meal, we would usually gear up, grab some snacks and juices, and jump on our bikes to go to the lake. To do so, we had to ride till the end of a bumpy road, then go through a sunflowers field. The lake was downhill from there. And every time we'd cross the field, a building in the far would intrigue us. It seemed abandoned. It was a typical factory building from the 80s. We could see a lot of windows were jammed, some parts of the roof had holes, and the sun was beaming from it. I swear we came across this place 30 times at least. Sometimes we'd come closer and play truth or dare. I always end up being the chicken, as Carl was really willing to check in there. One day, though, I was dared. We parked the bikes against a wooden fence, and then we started the trespassing. Outside the building, a dozen of rusty cars, engines out, some seats put on the floor, some others burnt or mauled. The entrance was poorly barricaded, but enough to make us climb up a pipe to the first window we saw. The inside was shocking. It looked like if people stopped all that they were doing to rush out. Tools were disposed on workshops. A car was hung up by a huge chain, and it was still slightly moving. The only thing that yelled abandon was the tremendous amount of dirt and dust. I remember Carl found an iron pole and started swinging like he was a video game character or whatever. I knew him. Even if he played it cool, I felt he was scared and tried to act tough. We headed to what seemed to be the administrative aisle. It was upstairs. We had to take some thin iron stairs, threatening to detach from the staircase on every breath. The gloominess intensified. This place was basically a long hallway with offices all along. Again, it could have been functional the week before, because except the dust and the stuffy smell, everything was left untouched. In a room, we found a newspaper from 1984 or 85, and it made us compute that they had bailed out this year. What impressed me the most was the family pictures and frames that we found in some offices. That was creepy. Who would leave work forever without taking back pictures of your kids and women? At this time, a picture meant something. Smartphones didn't exist, so if you lost it, it was done. When we took back the stairs, Carl saw a small wooden door under the staircase, and it led to a basement. That place looked inhabited. The floor was covered with trash, feces, and it smelled like urine. In a corner, we found the actively decaying corpse of a cat. A green curtain was hanging and masked what we were about to see. Behind the curtains, we stared in awe in front of a man lying on the floor. He was gibbering words we didn't understand and didn't directly look at us. Another man was facing a wall. Although it was clear we were there, I even stumbled on an empty can, he was still facing that wall. To this day, I don't know what he was doing. Now it was clear that the laying guy was drooling and had his eyes completely covered red. We ran out of there. I recall jumping on my bike and seeing a silhouette behind a window on the first floor. And we never told the story to our parents as we were too afraid of being grounded. Last year I chatted with Carl on social media, as we hadn't seen each other for 15 years. I asked him if he remembered that day, and he told me, "Of course I remember." I was soiling my pants, dude. I didn't want to go there at all, and I never thought that you would say dare. I'm a 26-year-old female from Michigan, but I was 20 at the time this took place. I live in a safe town, and I was working at a Walmart in the next town over, which is an even safer town. I worked midnights because I am definitely not a people person. Every day I would go home on my lunch to see my new puppy who, to this day, had kept me going through countless problems in my life. Working midnights, there was basically no cars on the road when I was going home on my lunches. It was when I was 4 miles from work at a stoplight that I noticed a car had been behind me for a mile or two. I drive like a grandma and always go the speed limit, so there wasn't a reason for someone to stay behind me with clear open road all over. I keep on my way home. The car is still behind me another mile. I thought, okay, that's weird, but maybe just a coincidence. I then had to turn on a side street which only has neighbors along either side for about a mile. And you guessed it. That car turned too. I started to get worried but still brushed it off. Maybe they live down the street. It's when I turned into my neighborhood that I started to lose it when the car was still following me. I turned down my street, but didn't pull into my driveway because I didn't want to lead this creeper to my house. So I kept driving and took another way back out of my neighborhood, and the car was still tailing me. Just to be positive before I called 911, I drove through my neighborhood the same way as before, and he continued to follow again. I got back on the main road from the side street and dialed 911, crying because at that point I was terrified, and explained the situation to them. I headed back towards my work. She asked me where I was, and I told her the crossroads, and lucky me, there was a patrol unit a mile up. Yeah, and the car's still behind me. She stayed on the phone with me and told me to pull into the 7-Eleven at the crossroads, and the police were close to it. The car pulls in after me too, and the dispatcher later told me to turn my hazards on so the police know which car was which. The car must have seen the police car and tried to leave, but not today, buddy. They stopped him on his way out. I was just parked in a spot crying hysterically. An officer comes over and asks if I know a Michael Stonebreaker, and I say I don't. The officer continues to say he has a good amount of illicit substances on him, and this isn't his first arrest, so he'll be going away for a while. Why did he follow me? What was his motive? The officer also said the creeper said that he was following me because he thought I was his friend. Why didn't he pull up to me at the red light where we were stopped at? Why wouldn't he have tried to get my attention somehow? It was a very terrifying experience for me, even if it doesn't sound scary to some of you. And this taught me a valuable lesson. Pay close attention to your surroundings, day or night. Anything can happen, even in a safe town. I was in college. My roommate was a born-again Christian, and she invited me to her Bible study and church all the time. Eventually I went, and I kept going. Wasn't a fan of the pastor, but there were a lot of nice young adults who liked to have clean, sober fun, and I didn't drink or party, so I felt like I fit in. But I didn't agree with everything they believed in, just the more normal stuff like God and helping the poor, and not some other things. This one guy in the Bible study, Drew, was pretty quiet. He was good-looking. He seemed like he knew everything about the Bible, which really amazed me. I thought, I know nothing about all this. He's so wise. I was 21 and he was 27. He wasn't a college student, he just worked, which I later learned, maybe he didn't. We were going to go on a young adult retreat, and because I worked, I couldn't leave early on Friday to drive up to the mountains with the girls in the group. Mutual friends said that I could ride with Drew, so I said okay. On the way up, Drew was pretty quiet for the first hour. Not very friendly at all, and it was a long trip. But as we got closer to the mountains, he really warmed up. We got pizza and he paid, which was nice. Then he stopped the car just so we could look at the stars. He even played some Brian McKnight. He was turning it into a date, but I didn't know it or see it that way then. I was starting to really like him and feel like we had a connection. He is just about to drop me off at the girls' cabin when he suddenly gets very serious and tells me that something happened between him and another girl in our church group, but she is telling lies about him and to not believe whatever I hear. He doesn't explain what actually happened and doesn't say who it is. I enter the cabin and all the girls are there, and very quickly one girl, Bree, who is probably the youngest in the group at 19, tells all of us, "Ladies, there is a wolf in sheep's clothing amongst us at this retreat." Now, if you don't know church folk, they get very dramatic and talk like this all the time. So I just thought, okay, here's some drama. She tells us this story about how she was talking to some guy here, but he started stalking her and wouldn't take no for an answer, and he even threatened her sister. Now my spidey sense is up, and I realize this must be what Drew was telling me about. The church group doesn't know who it is because she won't say because she doesn't want to gossip, and she says leadership will handle it. Well, Drew eventually leaves the weekend retreat early, and there goes my ride back, I thought. I don't know if he was asked to leave or what. That week, Drew asked me to hang out, and we do. I still like him and don't know who to believe. On our hangouts, we don't really do anything. He takes me to the mall and reads the Bible to me. Okay, cool. Then he parks his car on some suburban lookout, top of the world type of thing, and just said he is a view guy who really likes views. I am not one to be impressed by suburban lights, so I'm just like, okay, well, this is boring. I give him another chance. I invite him to come see a play with me. When he comes, he immediately meets one of my friends, Brian. Brian introduced us to his boyfriend, Nick. I'm in theater, many gay friends. Well, for the majority of the rest of the date, Drew lectures me about gays are going to suffer and I must not really love them if I don't stop them to tell them the truth about the gospel. I eventually cry because it is this ugly argument in his car we're having for hours in the parking lot of a Panera. I say I want to go home. This is basically the worst date ever. I don't agree with what he says. He also tells me I need to give up my dream of being an actress because what if the Lord doesn't want me to do that? Theater is something I did my whole life. Not to mention my major, and his reasons for giving it up had nothing to do with the impracticality of it, but because of God. This guy was turning out to be nuts. I get home and I offer to make us some cocoa to just kind of end things as friends, or at least on a better note. I know I'll see him at church and we have mutual friends or in the same Bible study. Things got weird. He tried to get intimate with me, but then also blamed me for tempting him. How, with my tear-stained, exhausted face? I ended up crying again. I just wanted him to go home, but I was so emotionally exhausted, I didn't know what to make of this. He calls and texts me that week, and I don't respond. Then it's Sunday night. I'm talking to my friend Tim, who no longer goes to this church anymore. I tell him I went on a date with Drew. And before I can tell him how it went, Tim says, "What? That guy's crazy. You need to abort that mission." Tim tells me that he is close with Bree and her family, and Drew is a stalker and threatened Bree's sister. I don't know what to believe because it sounds like Tim believes this just based on Bree's story. I hang up and call my mom to try to tell her what happened, what Tim told me about Drew, and how it was such weird timing considering what happened with me. While I'm on the phone with my mom, I get a knock at the door. It is 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. I look out, but no one's there. I go to get my roommate and ask her if she can just sit with me in the front room because I'm freaked out and think someone's there. There is another knock at the door. I open it, and it's Drew, and he looks all in a frenzy. I ask him what he's doing here, and he said he just needed to talk to me, and I wasn't answering my phone, which was because I was generally busier earlier in the day. The conversation is getting long, and my roommate is still sitting there, so I tell her she can go back to her room if it's okay. I let him come in because I am conditioned to be kind of overly nice, and this was a big mistake. We start talking, and as soon as my roommate is gone, he pulls out a knife and starts saying how he was worried my neighbors did something to me because I wasn't answering his texts, and he didn't know what kind of situation he'd be walking into. I have zero fighting skills, no experience in this situation at all, so I calmly say, as casually as possible, "Hey, can you put the knife away? It makes me feel uncomfortable." He asks me if I want the knife, and I say no, I just want to pretend it isn't here. I somehow talk him down, get him to leave. I think I convince him he still has a shot with me somehow. The next morning, my mind is clear, and I feel like I need to tell my mom what happened. She has me tell my dad, who has me tell the church youth leader and security at my apartment. I tell the cop the whole story, and he says that this guy is definitely a stalker, and I will see him again unless the police call him. I say it's fine, I think everything will be okay, no need to call. I just didn't want more drama. I'd never talked to a policeman about anything before, and I was still processing and didn't understand that this was serious. And that was my mistake. The next night, I went to a party, another church-related one, but Drew is not supposed to be here. He told me before that he wasn't going. Well, there he is. And I decide to leave, but my 21-year-old self doesn't think to ask to have someone walk me out. I figured if I leave and he's still here, problem solved. I didn't anticipate him realizing I left and following me. I'm walking to my car in a dark apartment parking lot, and I hear him call out my name. He's following me. I start running and I say I don't want to talk. He begins giving chase. I'm clicking my car to open, thinking this is how white girls die because she didn't let the cop call the stalker because she's dumb. Thankfully, my car unlocks. I get in and drive away. Problem is, this guy knows where I live. I move out 2 weeks later and I block him on all social media and my phone. Drew eventually somehow managed to make another Facebook profile and sent me a message that summer saying he was praying for me and he had forgiven me for trashing him to people, even though I still never told anyone that happened except for the useless pastor who did nothing. And that was the last I saw or heard of him. Unfortunately, this predator continued to serve at that church in the junior high ministry of all places, around many young girls. No one on church leadership listened to me or to Bree, who both complained that this guy was stalking us. I never reached out to Bree to let her know what happened to me, and I never got to hear her story in detail. But I told the youth adult pastor about the knife and him trying to get intimate with me and how scared I was. Thankfully, I don't go to that church anymore. This was all a pre-Me Too movement, and what sucks is that I've had a few experiences with crazy religious dudes. This was the first, but definitely not the last. I'm still trying to come to terms with why that is. I've been a listener for years now and enjoy binging episodes while I draw. My girlfriend and I were watching videos earlier, and one talking about how you're likely to walk by 36 serial killers and murderers in your lifetime without ever knowing, and it reminded me of an interaction I had last year with someone who ended up being an attempted murderer. I was attending a small family gathering at my aunt's house for her birthday last summer with my mom and my brother. My aunt is a nurse and works rotation at a hospital in a small community about 2 hours away. And during her few days off back at home, she invited family over for dinner and cake to celebrate and spend time together. She told us that she'd also invited a coworker and her son over as well because they had become good friends while working, so they decided to make the drive. Now, for the sake of the story, I'll just name that friend Kate and the son Chad. We were introduced to Kate and Chad when they arrived, and I know this will sound cliche and that everyone whose story starts similar to this will say next, I immediately got a bad feeling, but for me, it was just a heavy discomfort. I'm very in tune with my surroundings, whether it's a neurodivergent trait of mine or not, it's not important, but I always get a strong read on people from the way their energy shifts when they walk in a room for the first time. They were nice while being introduced, and Kate mainly stuck close to the kitchen to help with food, but Chad veered off and chose to sit on the back deck with my mom, brother, uncle, and my uncle's sister and I. My uncle's sister, who we'll call Tammy, is a talker, and she'll tell you any and every detail about her life, and that mostly includes her tumultuous romantic life. My mom enjoys Tammy's company and having friendly chit-chat about common interests that they share, so that was the dominant conversation for a while. Chad would interject and fit himself in, finding any area to talk about himself. He wanted us to ask more about him, and I got the sense that he was a little self-obsessed and enjoyed being the center speaker. I was actively engaging in the conversation, but I sat there, quietly observing. Soon the conversation veered and Tammy went off about her most recent love affair, and the man was married and telling her he was going to leave his wife for her, and she went on about how she wants to show up at his house when his wife's home and give him a piece of her mind. And at this point, I noticed how intently Chad was listening to her and how he lit up when he found that this man actually lives in his community. "What's his address? I can show up for you," he asked, while anyone would think this is kind of a harmless joke. Something in the way he looked genuine unsettled me, and this was brushed off as a joke, and the rest of the evening went on fine. All around, Chad seemed like a weird guy, but nothing else caused me to think that he was anything other than that. My mom and I talked about him following the party and how she felt the same way that I did. It wasn't until a few months ago, though, almost a year after meeting him, that I learned something extremely disturbing about Chad that made my blood run cold. told to me by my aunt as well as a news article, I found that Chad was currently serving a prison sentence for attempted murder of a 17-year-old girl. He was found guilty by a jury and charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, for offenses that had occurred in the weeks prior. And at the time of the attack, Chad was walking this teen girl home when he became violent and attacked her. He slashed her throat, stabbed her in her side, which caused her to have a 6-centimeter laceration to her liver and a 4-centimeter wound to her diaphragm. He then left her for dead. She survived the attack and later testified against him, and after pleading not guilty on all accounts, he was ultimately sentenced to 3 years in prison. The judge noted that he didn't take any responsibility for his actions and showed any level of remorse when he spoke in court. It was premeditated, and evidence showed texts that he made to a friend of his plans weeks prior. He claimed in those texts that she was corrupt and needed to be put down, among other vile comments. My aunt cut contact with her friend Kate, who ended up denying her son was guilty of any of what he was charged with, and she left that job soon after for unrelated reasons. What makes this all the more disturbing is that this attack happened 2 years prior to my aunt's party, meaning I sat across from someone who actively tried to take the life of a teenage girl in such a vicious and brutal way. He wasn't going to do it. He had already done it, and it just hadn't gone to trial yet. I'm driving home from work last night and was cut off by someone driving like a complete jerk. I live in the United States where driving on the right-hand side is the custom and the left-hand lane on a multiple-lane road is used for faster traffic. I was in the left-hand lane of the 2-lane road when a sedan makes a right-hand turn at an intersection, but instead of turning into the right lane that is otherwise unoccupied, this person pulls out in front of me. I try to avoid them and maintain my speed by moving into the right lane to pass, but they again cut me off. At this point, I'm quite annoyed and flash my high beams briefly at them. I move back over into the left-hand lane and pass them. No sooner do I do this, but this person is now tailgating me. I make my way to the intersection that I need to turn at and start in the left-hand lane, eventually moving over to the right and making my right-hand turn. Suddenly, the car moves from the middle lane, where one would continue straight through the intersection, to follow me making a right turn. I'm in the left lane again after turning, and they're still right behind me. There's a red light ahead and I stop, but not before moving to the right lane at the last minute to try and lose the person who I realize is now following me. There's a bank and a bar on my right, and I suddenly change course to go through the parking lot instead of back to my apartment about a block down the street. I'm weaving through the empty parking lot and this person is still right behind me, at which point I realize, crap, I'm going to have to lose this guy before I go home. I reach for my knife in my pocket just in case as well, but I don't have it. I realize that it's in another pocket of some clothes in my laundry basket. This guy is right on my tail, and I try to maneuver through the parking lot as quick as I can to lose them. I'm about to turn left to head back toward my apartment or through downtown to lose this guy when I hear a loud pop and think they've just thrown something at my car. No sooner do I realize this when I see a large, nearly perfect circular hole in the front windshield of my car. This person is behind me, and immediately I pick up my phone, hold the button for the automated assistant, and yell, "Call 911." The person behind me has put a bullet hole through my car. I speed past my apartment while on the phone with the dispatcher and into the parking lot of another bank where there are plenty of security cameras. I realize there's a hole in the passenger seat as well, and within minutes, 2 police cars arrive and I get out of the car with my hands up to show them I'm unarmed. When I'm able to look at my car again, I see a bullet hole in the trunk that goes through the back seat, grazes the top left shoulder of the passenger seat in the front, and comes out my windshield. There's broken glass fragments everywhere on the dashboard. 6 inches to the left and the bullet would have gone through my shoulder. 6 more, and any higher, and I wouldn't be typing the story out. I'll keep you guys updated if there are any developments, but the police say that they should be able to use the bank security footage to catch this monster. Update. The day after this event, a Thursday, I received a call from an investigator who was assigned to my case. He told me, "I want to try to recover the bullet," and I think I probably laughed out loud hearing this. "I'm not sure how you want to do that. It went clear through the trunk and out the windshield." And after hearing this, he asked me to come in the following day for forensic ballistics anyways. I worked nights and came in the following evening, Friday at 5 p.m., waited an hour after the receptionist told me he wasn't in, and then left. When I arrived at work for my shift and sat down at my desk, I got a call from the investigator apologizing for not being at the police station. I don't know if you heard the news, but there was another shooting last night at 8 p.m. I was also working that case, and this actually has everything to do with you. He explained to me that there had been a drug deal that went wrong the night before at a nearby gas station, and the one person involved was in the hospital. The same vehicle that officers had identified in my case had been requisitioned as evidence in the second shooting only 22 hours later. I changed my license plate as soon as the tax commissioner's office opened Monday morning. I don't want any of this to come back to me in any way, so I'll keep most of the details out, but here's what I do know. I won't be able to have a case since the bullet couldn't be recovered. More on that shortly. The people involved that shot my car and the other individual who ended up shooting them in the drug deal would all be facing significant felony charges, likely life in prison, with or without the charges my case would have added. I don't know yet if the shooter in the hospital will survive, but it will determine a lot about the nature of the charges. I won't say anything else about that for a number of reasons, but let's just say that there have been a lot of bizarre coincidences that followed. The bullet was a relatively large, high-velocity rifle round, so the bullet trajectory showed no deviation in the path of the travel through the entire vehicle. There was a perfectly straight line in the ballistic rods from the trunk, through the seats, all the way to the exit point in the windshield. If the bullet had hit me, well, I'd rather not think about that. Even if it only hit my shoulder in the spot where it passed through the passenger seat, it would have meant massive trauma. I definitely consider myself very lucky to have walked away from that, uninjured. I'm a college student working in retail, and over winter break I was taking as many shifts as possible because first semester left me broke. In the first few weeks of January, I had a slew of closing shifts at the register and on the sales floor. They were always pretty dry. One night, a man comes to the register with a return, and then comes back later with a lot of random clothes. Not that weird to have someone with multiple transactions, especially with the holidays having just finished. He's mid-50s, a South Asian accent, and really distinct salt and pepper hair. Before I go any further, let me mention I'm also a guy and I'm gay, but I usually have a fake customer voice so you can't really tell, if you know what I mean. This man is talking to me for a while and I honestly feel weirdly comfortable with him. At one point, he asked about my pant size and asked me to step back from the register to see my lower body. A lot of people ask me about what size I wear, usually to compare to their teenage sons, so this wasn't weird. But then he comments on my butt being big. I'm kind of half laughing like, oh, people told me that before, and I'm constantly thinking, why would I tell him that? He asked to see it, and in that moment, I almost did, again, while my conscience is screaming not to do that. Before I stopped and said, that's a bad idea, I'd get in trouble over a total joke. And he responds deadpan with, nobody's watching. Oh my God. He just keeps being conversational until I turn around to fold one of his items and he says, your friends were right about your butt. I turn around and he keeps repeating my name that he saw on my name tag, and I put my hand on the register while I wait for his receipt to print. He puts his hand on top of mine and I immediately twist into a handshake to try and normalize this. He says, it was nice to meet you, Andrew. And he walks out. And then he comes back in with more random stuff. Before he can try anything, another customer comes and suddenly he isn't talking. He mouths something to me at the register and leaves. And he comes back again once the next customer leaves. He asks for the bathroom, goes, and returns less than 30 seconds later. He asks if I work tomorrow. You have to understand my complete panic at this moment, and I just say the first thing that comes to mind, which is the truth. I say yes. And he smiles and leaves. I come into work tomorrow because I'd get a lot of guff if I called out, and I work on the sales floor. I figured nothing is going to happen, and that was just a one-night event with a creeper. I joke about it with my coworker, and then he walks in, and my stomach plummets, and I sprint to the bathroom to hide. My walkie-talkie flies out of my pocket, but I'm too spooked to do anything except beeline to the bathroom. In there, I call every one of my coworkers on the job, but not a single one answers their phone because our managers are bogus about that, and the walkie is gone. I hear footsteps outside the bathroom, and I feel trapped. I feel like vomiting, but open the door, and it's a white guy and his kid, thank God. I dash for my walkie and tell my manager the situation. She lets me take refuge in the back for 10 minutes and then makes me return to work because making women's leggings look pretty is more important than a man prowling the store. He walks around for 45 minutes and my coworkers always stay close to me. My closest friend described it as a lion searching for prey in the store. He was searching every corner, and I was thankful to have great coworkers to keep me on the move and surrounded wherever he came near. Eventually, he returned every item he bought with me yesterday. He told the cashier he'd come back again tomorrow, and I didn't work, so I'm not sure what became of him, and I never saw him again. I was arrogant to think as a man I would never be targeted like that by a creep. I won't be returning to the job this summer because my manager's response didn't sit really well with me. And hopefully, I'll find a job where safety is the priority and not an afterthought. For background, my family moved to the countryside from the city when I was about 7 years old, and I'm 21 now. Both my parents had grown up in the suburbs and had lived in the capital of our state for about 10 years before we moved. It definitely took us some time to get used to the train tracks that ran by our house, the wild animals, the weird but kind neighbors, and the odd visitors. Another thing is that you have to get off the main road and turn onto a long gravel drive to get up to our house. We can see the entire length of the driveway from certain points in our yard, which is about 3 acres. A few years after we moved in, my dad got a promotion at work and, as a result, started to go to conferences and business trips that lasted from a few days to a week, at least a couple of times a year. My mom felt nervous about being home with 2 young kids. I was 10 and my brother was 6, and so we decided to get a dog. We knew we wanted a big dog, but something that would be gentle with my brother and I. After a few weeks looking at shelters, we took home Rocky. He was 9 months when we took him home, and already pushing 70 pounds. We believe he's a German Shepherd mixed with some northern or mountain breed. We aren't sure to this day, but he's a massive red-colored dog with a long black muzzle and ears, a fluffy tail that he carries over his back, and a white stripe up his nose. It wasn't long until he was 100 pounds and an absolute force to be reckoned with. Even though he was very gentle with both my brother and I, loved our cats, and was a big ball of joy around anyone we brought into our house, he tended to be very territorial and aggressive with other dogs and very protective of us, especially of my mom and I. Once, the electric company came to do work on the telephone poles in our property without telling us first, and after 20 minutes they finally had to call us because Rocky had them trapped in their truck and was just jumping up and barking at their windows. I doubt he would have really attacked them if they'd gotten out of their trucks, but it was more than enough to make them think twice. This protective instinct came in very, very handy one day. It was summertime. My dad was at work, and my mom was home with my brother and I, since she was a teacher and off for the summer with us. My mom was working in our garden, and my brother and I were playing close by with Rocky watching over all of us. Rocky, all of a sudden, sounded the alarm, throwing his head up in the air and barking and howling. He makes a deep woo-woo noise. I looked up to see a dirty white pickup truck pull off from the main road and into our driveway. This wasn't necessarily alarming at first, as people sometimes used our driveway to turn around when they got lost. But the white pickup slowly ambled up our driveway, and I could see something strange in the bed. It was lumpy and discolored, but I couldn't really tell what it was until we pulled all the way up to our house, where our other cars were, and honked the horn to get our attention. It was meat. Giant red chunks of meat with some of the limbs of various animals still attached. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. Just a grizzled, scraggly man in his early 50s driving a pickup truck full of meat in the southern July heat. I immediately just got a really, really bad vibe from this guy, and I remember my mom telling my brother and I to go inside, and we did, but watched out the glass door. Rocky had surprisingly been quiet at that point, but was now next to my mom, and she had her hand around his collar. The guy rolled down his window and asked my mom if she wanted to purchase some meat. My mom said no, and to please leave our property. Instead, he went on about different types of meat and asking how much we wanted: beef, venison, pork, etc. My mom asked him to leave again, but instead, he decided to get out of the nasty white pickup. As soon as his feet were on the ground, Rocky went ballistic, barking and snarling. This finally made the guy stop. He looked at Rocky, looked at my mom, and asked, "Does your dog bite?" And my mom, deathly serious, replied, "Only if I tell him to." The guy took one more look at Rocky and, I'm guessing, decided not to mess with the giant, snarling beast. He got back in his truck, backed up, and headed back down our driveway. I don't know if he was really selling meat or not, but apparently he'd been around to our neighbors who also had just gotten a really bad vibe from him. We'll never know what he was really up to with those giant slabs of meat in the bed of his pickup truck. Maybe he was just a weird guy trying to sell some sketchy meat. Maybe he was looking for something else. We never saw Meat Man, and as we started to call him again, though. Rocky is still kicking it, by the way. He's almost 15 and completely deaf, but he's still out in the yard on summer days, watching over us. Our little village was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and I could count the amount of houses on 2 hands. We were a really quiet and close-knit community, and nothing ever happened there. Proper out-in-the-sticks stuff. One night a few years ago, my mom and my stepdad had gone out to this concert and left me in charge of my little brother and the dog. I wasn't very old, about 14, and I felt really proud that my parents trusted me enough to do that. I thought I was a pretty cool big brother and thought we'd be doing cool babysitter stuff like staying up late, eating pizza, etc. I'm kind of glad we did, because I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't. At about 10:30, the power cut out. I didn't think anything of it because the weather hadn't been great lately, and I figured that had something to do with it. I got some candles out of the cupboard and lit them and put some of our favorite songs on. As soon as I sat back down, Sonny, my little brother, turned to me and, being the weird little kid he was, told me very calmly that someone was outside. I was a little perturbed by him, but the dog hadn't done anything, so I presumed it was just the neighbors or something. He just shrugged and went back to his drawings. There's a running joke in our house that you don't need a clock with the dog around because he is such a creature of habit that he will consistently get up at exactly the same time every night to tell you that it's time to initiate his nightly protocol to go to bed. It was about 3/4 of an hour after the power went out when my dog decided that now was the time. I told Sonny to go get the dog his biscuit while I let him out for his pee. Now our kitchen is an extension to the original house, and so as such, has a flat roof that's comparatively low to the ground compared to the rest of the house, and offers easy access to the bathroom window. As I opened the door so the dog could do his thing, Sonny pushes past me in the doorway and whispers, I knew you were out there. I'm calling the police." As he turned around with the biggest, proudest smile you'd ever seen on his face, there was a very distinct rustling coming from just above the doorway. I don't think I'll ever forget the way Sonny's face dropped when he looked just above my head. I looked up. The man sitting on the roof above me panicked, tried to kick me, and then ran off into the next door's garden and presumably into the cornfields surrounding our village. I was scared stiff, and Sonny was bawling his eyes out. I ushered him inside as quickly as I could and got a knife from the kitchen. We both went to his room, and I told him to try and get some sleep while I waited for our parents to come back. It was an agonizingly long 4 hours before they did. My stepdad immediately went outside to check and see if everything was all right. I heard them talking about how something had smashed the fuse box. Obviously, we called the police, but they didn't come until later that day. They did a search of the immediate premises and found a makeshift bed in a nearby disused barn along with pictures of silhouettes of us in the shower through the frosted glass. I think it's pretty safe to say the whole experience definitely shook us up. We moved out as soon as we could, but I still shut curtains whenever I can, and I see shadows underneath every door I see. Sonny keeps quiet about it, but I'm not sure if that's just because his brain has cut it out or what. About 2 weeks ago, I booked an Airbnb in another country. I was going there for a concert. The room was cheap, so I knew that I wasn't going to stay in a 5-star hotel, but it was only for one night, so I didn't mind as long as I had a bed. And to start off, it already wasn't a great trip because my data roaming apparently didn't work in that country at all. I logged into a cafe Wi-Fi and planned my route in advance as best I could, and I managed to be at the house in time and rang the only bell and waited. Nobody came out. I repeatedly rang and waited 5 minutes, and I noticed the door had a slot for mail and looked through it. And I was shocked to see an entrance that looked like an abandoned barn. A super dusty couch right in front of the door, pieces of furniture covered in cloth, very dirty and extremely old, and I usually love old houses, but that just did not look like a house that was in use or prepared for guests at all. I wondered if I was at the wrong house and what to do now. As a super old, unwashed-looking guy walked towards the door from the street, I asked him if he knew where the Airbnb was, and he mumbled something which I interpreted as positive, so I asked him if he was Tim, my host, and he said yes and opened the door for me. Well, I already described the entrance. The centerpiece was definitely the super old creaky staircase that led to the upper part of the house, and I followed him upstairs. He was heaving and coughing and stinking of cigarettes, which wasn't exactly pleasant, but fine, I guess. And the second floor was also abandoned looking, super dark, with clustered furniture hung with cloth and randomly thrown together in a super creepy curtain that I couldn't catch a glimpse behind. Another stair up, and we were in my hallway, which was honestly the worst one. Cracks in the wall, old rural paintings and crosses hung up next to them. It seriously looked like the set of a horror movie. I usually don't have a problem with decor like that. I'm a goth, so anything darkly inclined is my jam. But everything looked so badly taken care of, so I got major creepo vibes from this house. He showed me to the bathroom, which had a huge hole missing in the bathtub tiling in the wall, and everything looked super dirty. He showed me to the bedroom, which was honestly okay, and there was just a lot of creepy dolls on the shelves that just completely threw me off, but the bed seemed fine. I asked him if they had Wi-Fi, and he said no, which sucks, and I really hoped that they would have that because that meant that I would have no way to communicate in there. And I also asked him when the checkout was the next day, and he said it doesn't matter, whatever that meant. He then dragged himself up to the 4th story, which was in complete pitch-black darkness, by the way, so that obviously gave me weird vibes too. I definitely didn't want to get in the shower, so I just quickly changed and charged my phone. When I went to the bathroom, I realized that I didn't even notice the creepiest part. There were no locks at all. Not for the bathroom, not for the toilet, and not for my room, which freaked me out, and I also noticed that there were so many half-used items that Someone, looked like guests before me, had left there like shower gels and toothbrushes and toothpaste. A random lash curler just lay abandoned on the shelf, not sort of like a here you go for your use in case you forget yours way, but it just looked like someone left it and nobody bothered to clean it away. I already made up my mind that I would definitely not be staying the night in this house. My mind was just kind of spinning with different scenarios. What if all of these products were left by people before me? And why did nobody leave horrendous reviews because they all got murdered? I was super spooked and seriously debated if I should take all my stuff to the concert because it did not feel safe in the slightest. But my back was really hurting from my heavy backpack, so I just took my essentials and left the room as soon as I could, not without sliding a folded paper under the door so I'd see if someone tried to open it in my absence. When I was coming down the stairs, I heard someone turning a key in the front door. I was a bit confused, but in the advertisement it said that a couple lived there, so I expected to see a sort of wife or girlfriend of the guy I'd already met. Instead, a middle-aged man enters and says, "Hi, I'm Tim." All I could think of is, then who is that other guy? And I was pooping myself inside, but I had brief small talk with him and finally left the house. And I was quite shook. Luckily, I made it in time to the venue and the concert was worth it. And afterwards, I was so tired that I knew that I couldn't stay awake for the whole night, so I checked into a hostel. That was also not perfectly clean, but at least they had Wi-Fi and a proper shower and a door that had a lock. And the next day I got thrown out at 10 a.m., so I made my way to the rest of my stuff. I don't know why, but I checked the mail slot again and jumped back. The old guy was just snoring on the couch directly in front of the entrance door. The strangest part about him was that he was now wearing, and I'm not joking when I say this, a Snorlax onesie. You know, like the Pokemon? And even stranger, I saw that he was hooked up to oxygen, some tank which was slightly sprawled out across the floor, the line leading up to his nose. And I had to sneak past him to get my stuff. I went upstairs, and my door was left slightly open, which I thought was very strange. As I gathered my things, I noticed the hair curlers now smelled like they'd recently been used, almost like that burnt hair smell that you get from too much heat on hair. And at that moment, I didn't wait around to find out or ask if someone had been in my room. I quickly grabbed my stuff and tried to silently bolt back down the stairs to the door. I wasn't really paying attention as I made a direct line for the exit, and I accidentally tripped over the old guy's oxygen tubes, ripping them out of the tank. It immediately let out a loud hissing sound, and the old man woke up almost instantly, gasping for air. In that moment, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I was so freaked out that I just said "I'm sorry" a million times and ran to the door, threw it open, and bolted out. I don't know if I overreacted, but honestly, from the beginning with those two guys to the missing locks and a checkout like that, if I had assumed the worst, this could have been the perfect setup to assault or murder someone. In best case scenario, nothing would have happened, but I probably would have had panic attacks all night. Usually I love solo traveling, but this all was just way too much. I'm not sure if this is going to be interesting of a story since it happened at such a young age that the story had to be relayed on to me through family. But when I was around 1 to 2 years old, me and my sister were at our aunt's house. My mom and myself and my sister were outside in the front yard, and she said that she needed to go inside for something and left my sister outside with me. My sister was around 5 to 6 at the time and should have never been put in charge of a baby. Anyway, during this time, she had left and was just the two of us outside. Apparently, someone had grabbed me, and no one noticed until my mom came back outside and I was nowhere to be seen. They immediately freaked out, and my uncle of the time had drove around the area searching for me. He had a feeling about who he knew it was and was on the verge of breaking into the guy's house because he banged on his door multiple times and was ignored. My aunt must have talked him out of it because they ended up just going back home and called the police. When the cops got there, they drove around and ended up finding me multiple blocks away, just standing outside of the very house my uncle said was the guy. They never made any arrests on the guy, and I don't even think they questioned him. My family says that they think once he heard the sirens coming, he panicked and just left me outside to be found because there was no way a baby that just recently started walking could have wandered that far off on my own. Religious delusion. The term delusion refers to a strong, consuming belief in something that is untrue. Religious delusions involve beliefs concerning religious ideologies or figures. Psychosis refers to a collection of symptoms that affect the mind, where there has been some sort of loss of contact with reality. Now, forgive me if this post is a bit scrambled, I just wanted to give some context. I'm on my third glass of wine and contemplating life right now. My brother, Brian, and I grew up very close. Movie nights with the family, family dinners, game nights, holidays, family road trips, all very normal stuff. And we eventually grew up and now, both in our 20s, moved away from home. I haven't seen him recently, but we text here and there to confirm aliveness, and Brian suddenly became extremely religious nearly overnight. I'm talking extremely religious. Now, I don't judge anyone, but no one in our family is particularly religious, and he does not have religious friends. He found a church in his new city that he is giving his life to, and he is completely isolated, and his only friend is the priest. He is secretive about what church it is, and he spends all of his time there, I guess. Brian is there late night every day, supposedly helping clean up, but that just doesn't sit right with me. They took a missions trip to Mexico recently, and I can only imagine what in the world went on there. The only media that he consumes is religious, and he has no friends outside of the church, and he only goes to church outside of work. Before ending each conversation, he will ask, "Are you ready to give your life to God or suffer in hell?" So, you can at least see what I'm experiencing on my end. It's all very strange. He recently took a trip back home to visit our family. My mom says the whole thing just felt wrong. He sat silent much of the time, observing. Otherwise, he looked far removed even while looking right at her. His energy filled the room and made her uncomfortable, and he was no longer the bubbly and affectionate guy that he's always been. He kept his distance and had nothing to say, and when he left, she said that she doesn't expect that he'll actually come back. Once a month, we catch up by playing video games together. We'll play for hours, and this is sort of our bonding time, and I entertain his religious conversations regardless of my opinion. Our last game night, he had so much fun that he wouldn't let me log off until about 2 a.m., and I recently found out that he gave his console away to a church member. I was upset. It felt like he didn't think about what that meant. We are not the phone call types, but we love video games and played growing up together, so game nights were perfect. He called me the other night to address that issue. He gave it away because his future wife, a premonition by the way, is coming, and she wouldn't like him playing with other girls, and he doesn't have time for anything except the church. I know this sounds absolutely too insane to be real, but unfortunately, it is. He assured me that he will be completely cutting me off because his premonition wife is more important than his relationship with me, his family. He spoke with such clarity that it was terrifying to be so deluded yet so sure of yourself. What type of church influences you to cut off family and friends? Apparently he'll be moving overseas to find his so-called premonition wife soon, and I was shocked. Premonition? Really? Our dad called him, and when he asked, "For you to need to cut your sister off, you must feel for her in another way than as your sister." And Brian avoided the question and didn't answer. Yeah, I know. How could it get worse than a premonition wife? Well, I'm sick for many reasons. Losing sleep, and I fear that my brother is in some sort of cult while under some sort of religious psychosis, on top of ruining our relationship with possible feelings towards me, his sister, and I'm a mess of confusion. What in the hillbilly F is going on, and how could it get worse? My mother believes it's his attempt at removing the temptation, aka me, from his life, and I'm stuck between wanting to understand what the hell type of church this is and also agreeing let's not meet. No one knows what to say to me and I can't blame them. I'm mourning what was once our relationship, but the situation gives me chills and I don't know where to go from here. All I can think of is this one quote that I read before. The more devout they are, the uglier their faith will become, since it's all based on a lie. My encounters with this individual, who I'll call Ben, began in November 2024 in school. He was a friend of one of my friends, Tom, and eventually we became part of the same friend group. I've always found Ben a bit creepy, which seemed to be the school population's general view towards him. However, once we began regularly socializing, I began to feel bad for my presumptions. That was until we were added to a WhatsApp group chat, and that was when things started to turn. First, it was the constant mindless images of gore that he would send, pictures involving torture victims and murdered children. I don't know if the images were real, but they made me very uncomfortable, and I asked him to stop, and he responded by telling me to take a joke and to stop being a baby. And after that, he began sending messages claiming that he had killed a cat, along with disturbing fantasies involving people I knew. I wasn't sure if Ben was just your typical edgelord, which is what my other friends thought, but something about it didn't feel right. Then, one Saturday, I was alone Christmas shopping in town when I noticed Ben standing down the road, just sort of staring directly at me. I waved at him awkwardly, but he just kept staring before casually walking into a side street. For the rest of the trip, every time I turned around, Ben seemed to be there, always at a distance and always staring. And eventually I gave up shopping and went home, kind of angry, and I texted him about it, and he just said that he didn't know what I was talking about. Later, during lunch at school, Ben and another friend, Jack, convinced me and a third friend, Zach, to come with them into the forest behind our school. It was stupid, I know, but I was bored and decided to go. And as we ventured deeper into the woods, Ben started acting strange, laughing and repeating, "Closer, closer." Eventually, both Zach and I agreed that it was creepy and decided to head back. And Ben seemed pissed when he and Jack returned. And when we asked why they wanted us to keep going, Ben said he wanted to set a fire and show us. And after that, I distanced myself and left that group chat, though I was eventually re-added. While I was on break from the group, Ben attacked Tom at school with a homemade blade, and I believe it was a razor from a pencil sharpener. Tom ended up with a wound near his wrist, and Ben was expelled from school, though no legal action was taken. And it's been about a month since then. When I was re-added to the group, I found that Ben had been sending graphic photos of himself doing things to himself and ranting about how he hates his family, blaming them for his misfortunes. I'm genuinely worried. He gives off killer vibes, but maybe I'm just being paranoid, and I often think about that time in the forest and in the town plaza. Anyways, should I be concerned or am I just overreacting? Sometimes I worry that Ben knows where I live and that he's not far away. So last summer, I was almost kidnapped. I usually walk around my neighborhood, sometimes.
Okay, outcasts, welcome to Insanity Collection. Today's story has arrived like clockwork. Isabeth isn't too fond of the family timepiece with its murder of Pearlface, and there's good reason she isn't. Its existence has grave consequences for her. I call this one Family Secrets.
When I was young, We were left unattended. My friends and I rode our bikes deep into the fields and returned at our leisure. We rarely played in the same location, and often ditched it after a few days. With each new adventure, we drifted further from civilization, and one day we struck gold. Figuratively speaking, of course. We came across a massive field which seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. It appeared to be abandoned farmland, and the grasses and weeds had grown past our waists. The entire area was completely silent, as if we had broken the sound barrier, and to some degree our voices seemed several octaves higher than normal. Whenever we went there, we lifted our bikes over a rotted wooden fence, and then we pedaled through the field. It quickly became one of our favorite locations. Our last excursion stuck with me the most. It was the day we discovered the farmhouse. I have no idea how we never noticed it before. It was just there, but somehow we overlooked it. We rode over to the house to observe it up close, and it appeared more beautiful from a distance. The age was clear in the peeling paint, the shoddy shutters, and the broken windows. The farmhouse was 2 stories tall, possibly 3, and had a large veranda smudged with grime. The porch extended around the house, and we noticed a rickety porch swing creaking back and forth on a rusted chain. There was no wind. While I was left pondering this, my friends abandoned their bikes by the wayside and dashed across the dirt road. I abandoned my bike as well and followed them hesitantly. I turned to my left and right. Just like the field, the dirt road extended into oblivion. "Guys, what if somebody lives here?" I asked. My main concern was disturbing the homeowner and getting kicked off the property. "Oh, come on, there's nobody here," George called back. George was the most adventurous of the 3 of us. His confidence usually got us all in trouble. I decided to trust him and crossed to the other side of the dirt road. Both my friends were already standing on the porch. "Can you see inside?" Ryan, my other friend, shook his head. "There's a thick curtain in the way. It smells really musty over here." I had to agree with him. It smelled old and decrepit. The porch, above all else, seemed to be in the worst state of decay, but somehow it held our weight. Curiously, we wandered all the way around the house. If anyone lived there, they would have heard us, because the wood squeaked terribly. Each step made me cringe, but when nobody confronted us, I eventually relaxed. None of us voiced it, but we all wanted to break into the house. It seemed too soon for that. We'd have to wait a week or so. We had to be absolutely sure that the farmhouse was vacant. The backyard was nothing spectacular. It was overgrown like the rest of the land. There was a crumpled shed several yards away, along with a rusted pickup. We put off exploring them and continued around the house until we reached the front once more. We scurried off to collect our bikes, but we became sidetracked when George discovered an opening in the lattice which led underneath the porch. Naturally, we were beyond excited. I inched myself halfway through the opening and confirmed that we could easily fit. That's when I noticed the look in George's eyes. He was about to make a bet. "I bet that I can crawl through there faster than you," he insisted with crossed arms. I lost our previous bet, so I needed to redeem myself. Betting was our thing, and it often involved races, whether on our bikes or on foot. Because of this, Ryan always kept a stopwatch handy. Fine. I didn't bother creating ultimatums. Nothing scared us. "I'll go first," I offered. I wanted the lay of the land, so George couldn't rig anything. I crouched down beside the opening and waited for Ryan to retrieve the stopwatch from his bike. The dirt was clammy beneath my hands, and I noticed lichens growing along the foundation of the house. I tried not to think of spiders and snakes. We had done worse things than this. "Wait a second, I want my eyes to adjust," I told my friends. I didn't want to risk bumping my head against anything. "Are you ready?" Ryan muttered, raising the stopwatch. "Yeah. Okay, maybe I was a bit nervous." "Go!" I forced myself through the opening and felt the lattice clawing at my clothes. I tugged my hips inside and took a hard right, crawling straight for the first turn. Once I reached it, the tunnel narrowed, and I was forced to army crawl. I felt the grime smearing into my arms and soaking into my clothes. I pressed onward and dug my shoes into the ground, practically dragging myself along. As soon as I reached the second turn, I felt a draft, but I tried my best to ignore the chilly air. Even so, the air seemingly grew colder, especially from my left, until it felt like ice was pressing against my ribs. The longer stretch before me must have been the back porch, and I felt disheartened when the tunnel remained narrow. If anything, it seemed narrower than before. As soon as I passed the halfway mark, I heard frenzied scuffling. The tunnel was too narrow for me to turn around, but I knew it was one of my friends, probably George. I felt him grab my ankle, jerking me sharply backward. I caught myself on the lattice and kicked backward angrily, hitting my friend square in the face. "You cheater!" I screamed. I army crawled faster than ever before. My friend was persistent, though, and I heard him right behind me. I blocked everything out and dug my arms mercilessly into the ground, clawing myself through the tunnel until I burst out of the opening. I was breathing heavily and covered head to foot with nasty red clay. "What the hell is the matter with you?" I screamed at Ryan. Ryan was standing there timidly, and of course George was nowhere to be seen. They were both cheaters. Ryan was quivering, and he extended the stopwatch to me. "You were under there for 27 minutes. "What? No, I wasn't." I snatched the stopwatch from Ryan and stared down at 27 minutes, 32 seconds. "You guys are messed up." Ryan clearly never reset the watch. I stopped shouting as soon as Ryan began crying. "That's not funny, Sam. We were worried. We were calling for you and you weren't responding. George went in there about 10 minutes ago to search for you." I didn't know what to think of this. I stomped over to the opening and began calling for George, but received no response. "You guys never called for me," I replied stubbornly, glaring at Ryan, who was still sobbing. Ryan allowed the stopwatch to keep running. When another 15 minutes passed, we were sick of waiting for George. "We'll just go back in and find him. You can go to the right, it's more open that way. I'll go to the left. We'll meet in the middle." Ryan seemed reluctant of the plan. I convinced him to squeeze inside after me, and we split up. This was all George's fault. He probably threatened Ryan to go along with it. I was going to kick George's ass when we got out of here. When I crawled beneath the back porch, I heard scuffling ahead of me. "George!" I called. "No, it's me." I narrowed my eyes in confusion when I met Ryan in the middle. "Did you find George?" "No. Did you?" My heart skipped a few beats. "No." By this point, we were both unnerved, and I had to help Ryan turn around. I couldn't go backward through the tunnel since it was so narrow. It took us several minutes, but we reached the opening without a hitch. We lingered around the front porch and wondered if we had missed George somehow. That was the irrational side of me thinking. Those tunnels barely fit one person, let alone two. It would have been impossible for George to pass us going in the opposite direction. We waited until nightfall for George to reveal himself, but he never did. We called out to him and warned him that we were leaving. It was growing so dark, we didn't want to linger any longer. We crossed to our bikes, covered in that foul red clay, and warned him one final time. Reluctantly, we pedaled away from the farmhouse and followed the dirt road home. Our parents were forced to believe us when George didn't return that night. The cops were called, and the next morning, we led them to the field and the lonely farmhouse. We described what happened in detail and watched them knock on the front door, waiting tirelessly for someone to answer. When nobody did, they went to investigate the opening in the lattice. The cops were too big to fit. While they were searching the perimeter, I went to retrieve George's bike from where we left it, but it was gone. George was never found, and the case was closed. 11 years later, there was a development in the long-forgotten case. Our city went through a period of rapid urbanization, and our county began buying up the adjacent farmland. The old farmhouse was demolished, but there was a sickening discovery at its core. The entire foundation was layered in dried blood and scattered with small bones. The bones belonged to children and were covered in harsh bite marks.